This video features an audio reading from the Catechism of the History of Ireland, written in the 1800s. This particular chapter tells the story of the Irish King Brian Boru and the medieval Battle of Clontarf against the Vikings in 1014 CE. When the renowned monarch Brian Boru ascended the throne of Ireland, invading hordes of northern Europe had succeeded in planting colonies at various places on the seaboard of our island. Their stations appear to have been admirably chosen, in most instances, for the successful pursuits of commerce, military adventure, and naval warfare. Although many of these foreigners had embraced Christianity and had formed occasional alliances with the native princes and people, yet their occupation of important positions, ambitious projects, and traditional cruelties must have caused them to be regarded with distrust and aversion by the great majority of aboriginal inhabitants. In the 76th year of his age, AD 1002, Brian was acknowledged sovereign of Ireland. From his accession to the throne, he was eminent for many victories gained over his enemies, for his encouragement of learning and learned men, for his munificent patronage of religious institutions, and for his wise decrees which gave comparative peace and security to all classes of his subjects. Soon after taking the accredited position of chief monarch, he led an army against the northern Hy-Nials, but was not successful in accomplishing the object of his enterprise, which appears to have been a subjugation of the races of Kinilconil and Kinilyowen. At a later period of his reign, the people of these districts paid him tribute. Most of the petty dynasts and princes of our island were reduced by him to complete subordination. Amongst the many politic regulations of Brian is especially mentioned his fixing of surnames, whereby each family selected the name of some distinguished ancestor, with the prefix O for grandson or descendant, or Mac for son. Those ancestors thus selected, with few exceptions, were men who lived in the 10th or 11th centuries. The monarch dwelt for the most part in his palace of Kincora at Killaloe, where he kept a magnificent retinue and dispensed hospitality in sumptuous entertainments. Liberal presents were made to subordinate chieftains in return for tributes exacted, which were necessary towards the support of this monarch's regal grandeur and exalted station. About the 12th year of Brian's reign, the Danes and Leinstermen near Kinsley defeated the foraging party of an army led by Maelsechlin, king of Meath, as far as the hill of Howth. Most probably to avenge this defeat of his ally, Brian sent his warlike son Morchad with an army into Leinster. He devastated that country from Glendalough to Kilmainham. This expedition appears to have been supported by the monarch in person, who led his forces to a place called Athnachartan, where he encamped. Brian held a defensive position in the territory of Slievemarig, the southeastern cantryd of the Queen's County. He ravaged the province of Leinster to the very walls of Dublin during this successful foray. Meantime, a powerful combination had been arranged by the Danes and men of Leinster and envoys had been sent to summon auxiliaries from the north and west of Europe. An immense fleet conveyed the foreigners, with their wives and children, to Ireland, which country they intended to subjugate and colonize. The King of Leinster, whose sister had been married to Brian Boru, mustered 9,000 fighting men, and the Danes of all Ireland united their forces with those of the Norsemen already disembarked. Those Danish and Leinster forces began their hostilities by an eruption into Meath and Bregia, AD 1014. A challenge was also sent by the King of Leinster to Brian, offering to meet the monarch on the plain of Clontarf near Dublin. Brian summoned the princes and chiefs of Munster, Connaught, and Meath to assemble their warriors under his command. With a considerable army, yet numerically inferior to that of the enemy, the aged and heroic king marched towards Dublin, where, on arriving about the middle of April, he encamped at Kilmainham. Thence he dispatched a chosen body of Dalmatians, led by his son Donogh, to ravage the Leinster province, left undefended at this time by the absence of its king and his army. On Palm Sunday, the 18th of April, AD 1014, Brodar, the Danish admiral, with his auxiliaries, entered the Bay of Dublin. It is said Maelmorra MacMurrough, king of Leinster, having received information about the absent Dalmatians, had resolved that Brian should be forced to an immediate engagement. Yet the circumstances related regarding the relative position occupied by the opposing forces before and after the Battle of Clontarf would hardly countenance such a supposition, without additional particulars corroborative of this statement. On the 23rd of April, Good Friday, the venerable Irish monarch appeared on horseback at break of day. He rode along the lines of his army with a sword in his right hand and a crucifix in his left, whilst making an impressive appeal to his men, inspired by a religious and patriotic ardor. The aged monarch then assigned the leadership to his son Murrough, at the request of his chieftains, and retired to the rear, where the signal was given for this fierce onset. The Leinster forces occupied the centre, flanked by the Danes on either wing, and their line of battle appears to have extended from the mouth of the Tolka, where Ballybough Bridge now stands, to the neighbourhood of Dollymount, along the Strand, which was lined with vessels of the foreigners. Their united force considerably exceeded that of Brian Boru, who had not more than 20,000 men under his command, according to the most probable accounts. These battalions were disposed in 3 divisions. The Irish right wing, under the immediate command of the 5 sons of Brian and of Malachy, king of Meath, performed prodigies of valour throughout the day. The centre comprised the forces of South Munster. The left wing, for the most part opposed to the foreign auxiliaries, was composed of Connaughtians, Dallaradians, and Gaels of Scotland. Desperate valour characterized the chiefs and warriors on both sides, and the battle raged with doubtful issue and great carnage to the 3rd or 4th hour of the day, when the Irish made a determined onslaught, and the Danes, almost deprived of leaders, began to waver and fall into utter disorder. A total rout ensued. Some of the enemy escaped to their ships, whilst numbers were drowned in the Tolka, endeavouring to escape in the direction of Dublin, and at a time when the river was probably swollen with the tide. Conflicting accounts regarding the loss sustained by the vanquished estimate their slain at from 4,000 to 16,000, including many native and foreign leaders. The loss of the Irish army is not accurately known, but it must have been very considerable when we take into account the duration and obstinacy of the battle, with the number of distinguished chiefs that fell on the field. Among these were Muro, son of Brian Boru, and heir apparent to the sovereignty of Ireland, at the ripe age of 63. Terence, grandson to the monarch, at the early age of 15. And Conan, who was nephew to the venerable hero of Clontarf. Towards the close of this glorious but sanguinary conflict, some strangling Danes made way to the unguarded tent of the aged monarch, who was then engaged in prayer before a crucifix. A feeble effort to wield his sword against superior force was repelled by more vigorous arms, and the heroic monarch paid the forfeit of life in the 88th year of his age, and in the very moment of victory. Having performed the last honours of sepulture towards Brian and his son Muro, whose remains were probably escorted by the northern contingent and deposited within stone coffins on either side of the high altar in the cathedral of Armagh, and having interred the bodies of other chieftains at Kilmainham, the Dalcations under Donogh joined the surviving chieftains and warriors of the Irish host. Whilst proceeding on their homeward march to Munster, the King of Ossory attempted to oppose their passage through his territory and demanded hostages as a token of submission. But a determined preparation for resistance on the part of the toil-worn and wounded Munster men obliged the King of Ossory to decline an engagement with the returning battalions. With this victory obtained at Clontarf, the Danish power in Ireland was finally broken. Henceforth, although some few maritime settlements were allowed them around the coasts, they were no longer formidable as a distinct element of resistance in the petty feuds of subsequent periods. The fame of this celebrated battle, proudly handed down to our times in tradition, song, and story, had also impressed its vivid reminiscences on the northern rovers, even when they had overrun the neighbouring Isles of Britain, and when their fleets hovered menacingly around her coasts. The Scandinavian chronicles and elegies yet preserve gloomy records of that signal defeat, which utterly destroyed all future expectations of successfully organized expeditions against the long harassed people of this island of the West. And yet we look in vain for any great social or political results to the nation at large, in the still unvaried catalogue of recurring broils and inglorious contests of rival chiefs and princes, actuated by selfish motives, and without the semblance of an exalted ambition to shape a rational purpose or confer a single permanent benefit on the people over whom they ruled. Thank you for watching. Please like and share this video, hit the subscribe button and notification bell, and feel free to ask me any question in the comments section below. Due to the sacred nature of these videos, I would prefer to keep them ad-free. Please help me to do that by clicking the Patreon link in the description box below and make a donation to this channel. Every dollar counts. Thank you for your support.